We also have the YouTube channel. Unfortunately, we still don't have a Vimeo channel, but now I learned that Vimeo allows to live stream to both platforms, which is pretty cool, so we might try it out next time. We have over 70 videos there already, over 1,600 members, and as I said, once we get 2,000, we do the big reveal for the names. Raise your hand over here for the first time. Okay, cool. Like always, we have 30 to 50% newcomers each time, which is exciting. For those of you who don't know, ReactNYC is a very active meetup. We have meetups every 2 weeks. And we have 3 to 4 speakers every meetup, which means we need a lot of speakers. And we are in constant demand of more and more speakers. So if you work on some cool projects or have some controversial ideas, or I don't want to talk about React ecosystem, or want to get a job and like show that you know stuff, even if you don't know what to talk about or if you're very shy, come talk to us. We'll help you prepare the slides. We'll help you to get to the stage, and it's super exciting. Manon, can you stand up? This is Manon. She works with us, and she is Director of Community Operations. So if you have any questions or you want to give a talk, please talk to her. So we have 2 more. This both are planned already?
October 3rd, yes.
OK, so we have 2 upcoming meetups, early October, late October, as I said, every 2 weeks. Follow our meetup page, meetup.com/ReactNYC, for more information. Besides that, we also have masterclasses and workshops here and there. So if you want to learn stuff, that's also a good place. Speaking of workshops, our next workshop is going to be on October 5th. It's going to be about building React from scratch and really understanding React internals. It's a paid workshop. If you're really interested into getting the advanced topics, go to fht.nyc/WSRIO. If you want to take it, want to write it down? Take a picture, it would be easier.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Raise your hand if you are a CTO, VP engineering, director of engineering, any managerial role. So we have this cool new group called Tech Leads Night. Come talk to Manon, she'll explain what it is. It's really awesome. Who works with React? Who works with Redux? Cool. So we have a new initiative called React Clinic, where we help companies for free to talk about their, solve their ideas or talk about best practices, take a look at their code. Unfortunately, it's not for individuals, but if you have a team and you work on a complex React project, have some performance issues or architecture issues, go to react.clinic, and we'll try to help you. Usually we get 1 hour free appointments once in a while. Speaking of conferences, we have a conference in Tel Aviv coming in November. It's November, I think. It's called React Next. So we have a pretty cool country, pretty nice places to visit. And we offer a tour combo with conference tickets. So if you go to reactnext.com, go to tickets page, enter this code, you get a discount both for the conference and for the 1-day tour in Jerusalem and Dead Sea and all the cool places. So use that. I want to say big thank you to Vimeo. So give them a huge round of applause. It's a really, really, really nice space, and they also provided all the food and then the drink, so thank you a lot. Brian, you want to, yeah?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Of course.
Welcome.
You need a mic?
So super excited to host tonight. We are excited about the talks tonight, especially this guy. I know Donavon from a previous life. If you're not familiar with Vimeo, we're all about empowering creators to share and connect with their audiences and communities. So we build tools to host, live stream, share, and sell videos in the highest quality possible. And we build a lot of our stuff with React and have been building a lot in React over the last few years. Been growing with the community over the last few years, engaging with the community. Trying to adopt the new cool things like new React 16 APIs and async stuff and TypeScript. Vimeo is 14 years old though, so there's a few pages with Move tools still on it. So if you like Moo tools and React, we're hiring. We're growing our team a lot right now. I just checked the jobs page, and there's like a ton of positions open. And so, yeah, it's a great place to be. Encourage work-life balance, an open, inclusive team, building great things focused on creators and letting creators connect with their communities. So have fun and talk to me during a break or afterward. And we're excited to have you here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. All right. Also, I wanted to say big thanks to you. So give yourself also a round of applause. Because we organize this meetup. Hi, everyone who's just joined. So we organize these meetups for you. So please keep coming. Please keep spreading the news. Please giving us feedback. Please keep speaking at the meetups. I hope that everyone likes that. And we obviously we have really big fun organizing these things. And without further ado, let's start with Donavon's talk and continue from there.
This tiny 10-point font up here. I'm from American Express. And I wrote a blog post a while ago called Clean Code versus Dirty Code React Best Practices. I'm always pushing clean code on my developers at American Express and just in my own code that I write for myself. And so I put this thing together. AmericanExpress.io is where I do all my blogging. American Express has a lot of different articles out there, and we talk about clean code. There are stickers. If you didn't get any, which is what this is about, I'll ask you later what that means. You're JavaScript developers, so you should know. And then, as always, my disclaimer is I may not know what the hell I'm talking about. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. So what is clean code? Clean code is a consistent style of programming that makes your code easier to write, read, and maintain. So everybody here writes code. We all maintain code. It's the reading part that kind of is hard, to let others read your code in a way that they'll understand it. It's generally written in a way you understand it. You know, maybe. You have deadlines and you get your code put together. And I didn't do that. Hold on. That didn't say anything it shouldn't have said, did it? OK. So write code that you'd be proud to take home and show your mother. I mean, we remember when we were in grade school and we made some macaroni bracelet and we wanted to take it home and we wanted mom to wear it. And your face would light up when she put it on. That's the way you should think when you write your code. It should be something you're proud of. Clean code passes the smell test. And what do we mean by that? We all know when we write some code or we look at some code, it just doesn't feel right. There's something about it. You can't quite put your finger on it. It doesn't flow. You had to do some hack here to get it to work. If code is written well, it just comes together. It just flows. And it's like perfection. But if it's not, it's like you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. So what I say is take a break, step back, get some water. And when you come back to it, the next day, the next hour, after lunch, it's probably going to happen. It's going to click for you. A friend of mine had this little man theory. And he said, picture a guy under an information desk. And you go up to the counter and you said, you know, I need to remember this. There's this thing that's in my head. I can't remember it, though. This is what I want to remember. And he goes like, just a second, I'll be right back. So he goes running into the back storage room. He's halfway up the ladder, and you go, whoa, whoa, whoa. And he comes running back, and you're like, this is what I want to remember. He's like, OK, got it. And he goes back, and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let him go. Forget about it, right? If you've all done this. You're trying to think of something. When you walk away, you come back, and then it snaps. That's the little man theory. Clean code is dry, unlike this guy. Now, what is dry? Dry stands for don't repeat yourself. Are these like popping up when I do that? Yeah? There we go. Cool. You remember like VH1 pop-up videos, like back in the 90s or whatever, 2000s, whatever? I was going to do like actual boop pop-up things, but I didn't have enough time. So if you see patterns in your code, that could mean your code could be dried. And what do I mean by patterns? I mean actual patterns. If you can step back, like make your code really, make your font small in your editor, or step back and look at your code, you'll start to see like, you know, indentations, blocks of code that look identical, right? That probably are identical, except for maybe a variable or two or just a piece of information. That's code that you could make dry. Let me show you an example of a piece of code. Like right here. You see that block, which is the same as that block, which is the same as that block, right? Sorry. Whoop. There we go. And I don't even have to make it too big because it's not, what the code is not important. You see patterns. And that's code that you could dry up. OK. Now, it's possible to make your code too dry. And then it's not maintainable because it is so dry that even you don't understand it anymore. So know when to say when. I'm going to skip the live coding. Naming things is important. At my old job, we used to like stop everything we were doing and, hey, everybody, I need help naming this function. And you describe what, you know, somebody would say, well, what does the function do? And you just start describing it to them, and you kind of name itself almost. In describing what the problem was, you kind of come up with the solution. But naming things is important. A wise person once said there are two hard things in computer science. Does anybody know what they are? And off by one. So naming things is important. What's wrong with this store name? What isn't good about this store name? Anybody? They called it $1.99 cleaners, right? What happens when the price goes up to $2.50 or $2.99? Are they going to change their business cards? Are they going to get a hold of the phone book company and tell them we got to rename things? New stationery? What's that? So it looks like they tried to do it with discount, but that looks like an afterthought there, right? So naming things is important. So use variable names and function names that are meaningful. Describe what it does and not how it does it. So in other words, don't expose the implementation details in the name. That's something that should be only in the code. So fun fact, Motel 6 was originally named Motel 6 because it was $6. So bad name, because the day after they changed it to $7, didn't they feel stupid when somebody came in and slapped $6 on the table to get a hotel room? Nowadays, nobody knows that, so Motel 6 doesn't have the $sign in front of it anymore. But still, bad name. Clean code is self-commenting. So don't comment the obvious. Don't put / lemon behind your lemon code. People know that. You don't need to do that. It just adds to the visual clutter. And here's the thing that gets me all the time. You add a comment to something, right? Years later, whatever, you change the code because it's not valid anymore. Did you change the comment? Probably not. Maybe not. So what you just did was you caused the next person to look at that code a lot of grief, because humans tend to read the comments because they're very verbose and they explain a lot. But computers don't read the comments. They read the code. So you just took this developer off track when the computer's going to do one thing. And if you do have to comment something, a couple things. Comment your intention, not your implementation. And comment things that are specifically done in a strange or unique way. Like there could have been an easier way to do it, but because of some obscure like back-end system thing, you have to do it a certain way. Make a comment about that. That's the only way the developer is going to know. And then your comment actually means something, because there's no comments in your code anywhere except for this spot where it's really important. So clean code does not take longer to write. Initially, and a friend of mine said this once too, initially you have to slow down in order to speed up. And what that means is you kind of have to train yourself to write clean code. But with anything in life, once you start down a path and you start doing it and it becomes second nature, it's actually easier for you. So if you start writing clean code, eventually it's going to be easier than writing sloppy code. And then you're more productive, and you can actually write faster. And the thing is, if you do it right the first time, you'll never have to touch it again. And sure, there are new requirements that come off of the business. But if you write in small modules where each thing is a building block, that building block doesn't go out of style. That building block is still true. What you do with those building blocks may need to be refactored or rewritten with business requirements. But something like reverse a string is always reverse a string, right? You can't reverse it differently. And the thing is, if you write clean code, your code reviews go faster, because the people reviewing your code don't have to say, hey, on line 43, you could have done this, and then you have to go back, redo your commits, get them to look at it again. And so there's asynchronous time there that happens. They're not going to be there reviewing your code the second you push. So it just takes too long. Again, break it into smaller modules and then write it and forget it. So here's some practical examples of everything I just talked about. Default values. So this is kind of the way, and all of this code I kind of found in the wild. Not at American Express, obviously, because it's all clean code. But I found all this code in the wild, and maybe I wrote it 10 years ago or what. But here's some code, and you want to default class name to icon large. So kind of the traditional old school method would be to take and make another variable called additional classes, and you say class name or icon large, right? So additional classes is going to be the default if you don't specify one. So in IE6, they came up with the default value syntax where you could say class name equals large icon. Cool. If you don't specify class name, it defaults to large icon. And notice what we also did there. We could, because we didn't have to create this const, we can lose the return statement and do something called a single statement fat arrow function. So in this second case, in the clean code, it's a implied return statement, so you don't have to have a return statement. Again, visual clutter. But in React, there's also a way that you can use default props. And notice it's actually more code, but there's some actually good reasons why this makes a lot more sense. And it has to do with caching. So there are 3 different ways that we just showed to default something. But the first one is definitely not the way you want to do it anymore. Separate your stateful aspects from rendering. Separate how things look from how they work. So here's some code. And inside of it, we have some state. We have a loading. We set it to true. And then we have, in our component did mount, we do some fetching of some data. And then we change our state. And then we render everything. That's fine, but everything is all together. Testing is a little more difficult using this. And it's probably not going to be this small. I mean, I did a very small thing to fit it on one screen here. But this could be, many, many pages worth of code here. So in this example, we've taken our render function, and we've actually put it in a separate file called render user. And all it does is render a user. It gets some data, and it renders it. Actually, it doesn't even get data. It's passed in some props. You can write that. You can test it. You can forget about it. And that's probably the code that has to be changed a lot, like with new business requirements come up, things like that. But the fetching of the data, the state handling, and all of that is done here. And the likelihood that that's going to change is a lot less. So break things up, put it into separate files, put it into separate, separate units of work for your head. And even in this case, you can concentrate on state and loading data right here. And you don't even have to see this rendering code on your screen. Who cares about that? When I'm ready to write the rendering code, when I'm ready to think about the rendering code, I can go look at it. But it's not right there in my face. Stateless functional components. I'm a big believer in stateless functional components. Love them. Here is kind of the old school method of doing it, where you just have a render function. There's no state at all in here. So React in, 0.14, not even version 1, which doesn't exist, came out with stateless functional components so that you could take that and turn it into that. Again, it's using the single statement form of a fat arrow function. So again, no return statement on there. Rest and spread. Love rest and spread. In the old days, this is how we had to do things if we wanted to take and grab some of the props off of an object and do something with it, and then take the rest of the props and pass it to another component. It's so ugly, I can't believe we had to do this. Every time I look at this slide, I want to throw it. But with rest and spread, it's beautiful. The ... others, this, well, I can't even point up there, but that entire thing is props. We have class name, and we have anything else. So anything else that's passed in props is put in others. That's the rest operator. And then spread is down below where we say on or my other component. others, it spreads that property, that object, to the other component. And now you should kind of know what this means. Spread the love. Destructuring. Destructuring is also very cool. Here's a simple component will receive props. This is kind of how you used to do it, how you would do it if you weren't using destructuring, where you take new props, and then down below you'd say new props.active, set that to active. If you destructured right up top in the arguments, you could destructure just active into the variable called active, and then you can use the object shorthand syntax of ES6 to set state active : active. Notice there's no active : active, because if the name and the variable are the same, you can bypass that. Again, just less clutter on your screen. Destructuring of an array. This is probably my favorite thing to do in ES6. If you had, and we do this a lot with language, we have language and country in a one code, like en-us, right? And you want to get the language from the country. The way you'd kind of used to do it in ES5, you would split it off the dash, and then you'd end up with an array called split locale. The 0th index is the language, the 1st index is the country, and you just pull each one into each variable, and you have language and country. But along comes ES6, and you can do that. And it's just so cool. What that does is it takes, same thing, it splits on the dash, producing an array with 2 values. And on the left, where we say const language, country, it takes the 0th, throws it in language, the 1st throws it in country. So much cooler. OK, I wanted to talk about, I will just describe what the next thing was. So we talked about destructuring arrays. Here we're going to talk about destructuring strings. I won't live code this for you, but it is possible to destructure a string. I won't live code it, but I want to show you really quickly because it's cool. And I have to do this again, don't I? OK, so this is how you might used to do a reverse function. You would split text like that. But if you want to destructure a string, you can do that, and it does the same thing. So it's possible to destructure a string. And that's it. So thank you very much. Again, American Express's technical blog is americanexpress.io. I'm Donavon West. I'm at Donavon, like everywhere, on the Twitters and on the, the Facebooks and all that. We're doing a couple questions. We're doing 2 questions.
How do you deal with existing dirty code that works?
How do you deal with the existing dirty code that works? Well, there's a couple answers to that. One is you probably leave it alone until you have to, because you have better things to do, and you have code to ship, and you have features to ship. But at the same time, whenever you go in and have to patch it, if you go in and make a change to it, you'd better allocate some time to do it right. Because if you just go in and make that one, it's just, oh, come on, just one more thing. It's a simple line. All I have to do is change the 3 to a 4, and I'll be done with it. Yeah, but how long are you going to keep that going, right? And you may say, yeah, I'm going to go change the 3 to a 4, and we have to move on. But there are some business decisions, some technical decisions that need to override business decisions every once in a while. And I would say partner with your business people and let them know that clean code is maintainable and dirty code is not. And if they're a good partner, they don't want the feature to take 2 weeks to write. They want the feature to take a day to write. So they're going to understand.
Question? Right there? In cases where, like, a new feature for ECMAScript is released that makes it, like, syntactically easier to understand, reduces, like, the cognitive load, does that automatically make working code dirty? Does it become dirty post-feature release?
So when ECMAScript has a new feature out, does that invalidate or make dirty the code that was clean a couple weeks ago? I think is what you're trying to say, right? Well, if I gave this talk 2 years ago, all that dirty code was probably clean. I wouldn't rewrite it for the sake of rewriting it. I mean, I probably would because I'm crazy, but I don't think people should rewrite it for the sake of rewriting it. It still works. When you're writing new code, you should adopt the new practices. I mean, where would we be? I remember a couple years ago when ES6 was out and we started writing ES6, and you'd say to people, hey, are you writing in ES6 yet? And they're like, no, we're still writing ES5. And you're like, oh, we use Babel at work and we can write ES6. And they're like, oh, bastards. But now everybody writes ES6, right? So we have to do it. Where would you be without it? So I would say, write your new stuff in the newer syntax. And again, just with dirty code, when you go in, change that line, change it to the new syntax. Because your new developers want to come in, they're going to learn the new stuff, especially the junior developers. They learn the new stuff. They may not even know the Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Now where'd it go? I didn't do anything.
Don't breathe.
Okay. Yeah, hi. My name's George, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sharing React components across platforms with web and React Native. First, I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'm a React Native developer at Univision. Before working at Univision, I used to work for a small startup building TV OS apps. At Univision now I help oversee 3 different React Native apps. I also play coffee and I like cats, and I play in a death metal band. So React Native, I don't know, has anyone here ever used React Native before? Oh, a lot of you. All right, well, I'm going to talk about some stuff that you guys probably already know about. But basically, React Native is a way of writing React code that compiles down to native views. So unlike other cross-platform frameworks, you get React code that actually looks like, that is actually native code, right? At the end of the day, you can open up your project in Xcode and Android Studio, and it's there, and it's a React Native, it's a real app. It's still just React, so you're still writing React code, even though the interface is a little different. You know, it's still the same environment. You've still got state, you've still got stateless components, you still got JSX, so it's pretty easy to onboard and learn. It uses the Metro bundler. So if normally when you're running Webpack, you have a Webpack process in the background that runs and you know, listens for your JavaScript code changes to transpile. Metro bundler is essentially the same thing. It hooks into your simulator that's running or what have you, and it transpiles your JavaScript code into native code. And because of that, you have access to debugging tools in Chrome, which is pretty cool. So this is just some boilerplate when you run what is essentially the Create React app with React Native. Like I said, it's pretty similar to just regular React app. There's nothing crazy going on here, right? The only big difference is styles, how they get passed in, how the app gets registered at the bottom. You use app registry to hook into your native app, and you import views and text instead of divs and p tags, right? So I want to talk a little bit about Storybook too before I start talking about sharing the components. Has anyone here used Storybook before? Cool. So like in the previous talk, I'm a big fan of functional components, stateless components. I feel like UI components should be only in charge of displaying UI and not managing state. And if you use Storybook, Storybook's a really good way of kind of organizing your stateless functional components. You can use it for state, but it's really good if you've just got presentational components that are only in charge of displaying UI. It renders the component outside the context of your app, so you've got it nice and organized for whatever component you're working on. You can usually publish your Storybook links so that you can give them off to designers or product managers for approval or anything like that. Yeah, and it's nice and easy to organize, like an IDE. And it also works like the Metro bundler or like Webpack, where it's just a process running in the background that's on a port that listens for your code changes and then transpiles accordingly. So I guess I'm going to show Webpack, or show Storybook if you haven't seen it. This is basically what it looks like. You've just got a little thing on the side here, and you can change some stuff depending on what props you give the component. Pretty straightforward. So at Univision, we were working on a track for new sports widgets for our Deportes app, which also was on the website, right? And we were talking about ways of sharing React code across platforms. Basically, the designs were super similar, almost identical, and we were going to have to rewrite the same thing over and over. But we didn't want to do that because, you know, you're writing the same code twice. So we want to figure out a way to get it to work on all platforms. The initial thought was to use web views, which on mobile apps is like an iframe, right, where it's just rendering the web page inside the app. There are a couple problems with that. For one, web views are not well supported in React Native. They haven't been for a while. They're not. It's always kind of a struggle trying to get them to work correctly. It's also not performant. You're rendering an entire website inside your native app, where you could just render your, you know, app code. And React Native just recently announced that they're going to be deprecating it internally so that a third-party library can take over for, you know, reasons I just went over. So we decided to use React Native Web to deal with sharing code across platforms. Basically, the way it works is it essentially aliases your React Native imports, aliases it into React Native Web so that when it looks for your view tags or your text tags or whatever tags that React Native uses, it would alias it to that library, which then converts it to web code. So your view would become divs, your text would become p tags, and it would just kind of transpile that way when you publish your code. Like this?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so your primitives turn into divs or p tags, and then you also have access to your web platform. So when you're using React Native, you can import platform to see whether or not you're using iOS or Android and kind of change code accordingly. And this gives you access to web as an option as well. And then lastly, it gives you a .web file extension, which is huge, right? So if you're writing components and you have components that are importing from other components, and you have code that is web specific, you can have the web file extension, and your React tree, as it renders out, is only going to render out a certain way for web, and similarly for iOS and Android. So it's kind of a small thing, but it's pretty powerful. Yeah, so we keep shared components at Univision in a separate repository so that all UI is only separated out into all of the UI widgets are only separate there. And yeah, we're big advocates for pure functions. If we are going to use classes for these UI components, we use them to hook into lifecycle methods, but we don't have any local state. And we keep if we do have state that we need to display when we're using the Storybook, we just keep it at a level for like the story level. So we'll write some state around the story to display something like a toggle or something like that. And the way it works when you're publishing the node module is there's a script that gets run before during the pre-published script that transpiles all the React Native code into a lib folder that does all that aliasing like I was talking about. And that's what the web code talks to, and then React Native circumvents that and talks to the components directly, so you're just writing React Native code. And yeah, I thought I would maybe show a little bit of what the React Native code would look like. So here we've got some React Native code. You want me to make it bigger? Yeah. Let's get rid of the. So here we've got some React Native code. It imports a view, a style sheet, and a style sheet is how we deal with styles in React Native, where you pass it a JavaScript object. And yeah, and it just renders. You just render views like you would. There's nothing really crazy about it. It's just regular React Native code. It's just that when you transpile it or when you publish it, that's when it gets changed into web code. Oops. So a couple pain points that we went through while trying to make this work. Trying to get the web team to come along with writing React Native code is kind of an uphill, can be a little bit of an uphill battle if people are not used to that environment. Although it is easy, it is relatively easy to write React Native code when you're coming from React. You are still working in a native environment, so it can be a little bit intimidating. But the main thing with styles was a big problem, right? So you've got, most web code is CSS files that you have separate, and you just hook into classes, right? But with React Native, you pass objects to the style sheet API. So the web team had to kind of change how they were dealing with that. You don't use class names like you would. And pseudo classes obviously don't exist on React Native, right? It's not like hover can exist on an app. So we decided to use style components to kind of standardize how we would deal with styling for shared components. And style components are higher order components that kind of bake the styles into it. So you use a template string to pass in what's standard looking CSS, and it would and then you reference the new component that you've created in the JSX code. And then inside the stylings, you have access to your props, so you can change stylings depending on the context of what you're doing, as well as the platform. And then using that, you now have access to pseudo classes like you would before. And yeah, this is kind of a simple example of style components. It's just a function that takes the input, and you pass it a template string. And then in there, you put in your CSS, and then you have access to your props, which you can then change to accordingly, depending on the platform that you're using, like iOS, Android, or web. Yeah, and that's about all I got. The experiment was a success. We have 100% test coverage using just snapshots in the repository. It's live. If you download the Univision to port this app, all the widgets are shared components across the web and iOS. And we're also hiring. So if anybody's looking for React Native work, please feel free to reach out to me. And yeah, that's it. Does anyone have any questions?
Two questions again?
Did you guys experiment with maybe going the other way, like starting with the web code and transpiling to React Native?
Yeah. You were saying trying to experiment the other way with starting with web code and transpiling the opposite way. While React Native Web does support that, it's not as well supported as importing React Native code and then transpiling the other way. So you can get more granular with it, where you can kind of see exactly what's going on. It's a lot more like with the web code, you take a component and you just kind of drop it in a black box function that spits out React Native code, whereas the other way, you're just writing React Native code, it transpiles it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand your code structure a bit. So you're decoupling the presentation layer with the business logic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you usually write that in the same document? So you're writing your application logic and your pure function components?
What do you mean in the same document?
I mean the same JS file, or you?
No, they're completely separate. Sorry. The question was, do you keep your functional presentational components in the same file or same area as the stateful components? And no, we try to keep all presentational components as separate repositories so that we can use the Storybook for all of our components that are UI components, and then each app is only in charge of managing state itself. So because the different applications will maintain state in different ways. And some teams are using Redux more heavily, or some teams are using maybe component level state more heavily. So we're trying to separate that completely decouple them so that the UI is only in charge of UI and state manages state and just passes its props down. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Got it? I need all of you to take your phones out because it's time for our traditional survey. For those of you who don't know, or if you're here for the first time, or not for the first time but missed it somehow, we have this Kahoot thing where we ask you questions and you answer them, and hopefully we create the better meetup or the best meetup in the world. Let me find. All right, that has cool music, and right. So you take out your phone and you go to this Kahoot.it and use this game pen. And the first person who breaks the UI with some weedy name and that everything breaks gets a prize. No one got it so far. I think it has two. No, hasn't it? For some reason. Right. Wait, no! Is it again? Sorry. Okay, now everyone got their phones out. So object, yeah, drop table didn't work, undefined didn't work, alerts didn't work. I don't know. Surgeon JSX is on a secret mission for people who are waiting for Surgeon JSX. So he has deployed for secret mission, but he'll join us at the next meetup. If you don't know who Surgeon JSX is, you can go to our YouTube page and check the last meetup. I came for Nir. Nir is also not here today, but he'll probably also join us the next meetup. Can you hear the music, or it's just... You can? Can you hear it back there? It's really cool music. Right, who's still trying? Drop tab. Who's still trying to connect with a weedy name or without a weedy name? All right, so we're going to start in 10 seconds. 9, 6, 2, Venmo. All right. Spread option. I think I saw spread love there. Oh, gotcha. No. All right, so we're going to start. We have 10 questions, 20 seconds each. You can choose multiple answers. And there is no, they might be right or might not be right answers for all these questions. So the first one is, how well do you know React? Oh, can't you see there? I'm not sure I can increase that. Let's see. Okay, so it's funny that there are a lot of people who are fine and expert ninja rockstar gurus, but there are only 14 people who read the docs. There's a lot of experts that just looked at the source code probably. So you can choose multiple ones. Are you looking for a job? Also might be an interesting question. Let's see how many people are, they don't really need to look for a job. Okay, 4 people are hiring, 15 people are here just for interesting stuff. Who's hiring? Raise your hand. Take a look at them, 5 seconds, and then attack them at the break, which we'll have soon. This. I'm a front-end developer because... See, just the truth, just the truth. Red, I failed to make it to Harvard. Blue, I'm Canadian. Yellow, I can't sing. Green, I want to change the world. Still time, okay, so many people want to change the world. If you're a Canadian, raise your hand. Go Canada?
I do go to Canada.
I'm not sure it counts. How old are you? Very serious question. Red, punch cards. Blue, Java / C#. Yellow, COBOL. And green, Dart and Swift. Let's see the demographics. All right, Java and C#. 6 people are here from the, I don't know. All right, interesting demographics though. And by the way, COBOL is still heavily used in some organizations, so don't think it's dead. Do you know how connect from Redux works? Let's start with serious questions. Yes, no, I use MobX, I love Angular. Usually we don't say. Yeah, by the way, I forgot to mention that we have no privacy policy for this quiz, so we are stealing all your data from your phones once you're connected. Too late. All right, people that know, think they know how Connect works. Interesting. No, I love Angular. 8 people love Angular. I don't know what you're doing here. 6 people go MobX. Raise your hand if you use MobX. If you used it. And who used MobX state tree? Or just plain MobX? OK, interesting. How many meetups a month do you attend? Only ReactNYC, obviously. 2 to 3. On average, less than 1. Or more than 4. Serious questions. All right, only ReactNYC. Interesting. Raise your hand if you've been to more than 5 ReactNYC events. Wow, more than 10? Actually, more than 20? So 10, yeah, we have Roman. He's been at more React meetups than I. So he's filming all of them. What else should we do at ReactNYC? Now let's see. Well, that's interesting. So first of all, an event about other frameworks like Angular or Vue. Blue is the hackathon. Yellow, social mixers. And green, something completely unrelated to technology. So bring some spice to the meetup. Besides all the cool stuff we're doing already. A hackathon. A weekend hackathon?
Like this weekend?
No, not like this weekend. In general. Probably next year, I don't know. A few weeks ahead. Maybe we'll do a Christmas hackathon. Who doesn't have anything better to do at Christmas? No, I'm kidding. I have things to do at Christmas. All right, interesting. No one wants an event about Angular?
I mean, 10 people.
10 people. All right, we'll do a small event. How clean is your company's React code? Oh. Red, clean, tested, efficient. Blue, messy in some places. Yellow, mostly spaghetti. And green, don't get me started. Let's see. That's questions for you, Donavon. All right, messy in some places. Okay, React.clinic. All got it. Would you like to get a free iPad? Red, yes. Blue, no. Let's see how many people would like to get a free iPad. Or maybe some people just don't like Apple's products, which is also fine. $17 people, like, yeah, why I have a rich ankle, why I need a free iPad. Yeah, I also like to get a free iPad, but it's not that we are giving you one. So. Why do you come to ReactNYC? The last questions before we go to a break. Red, I got nowhere else to go and I'm hungry. Blue, find my future husband or wife. Yellow, find a job. Or green, to become a better developer. Let's see. All right, 7 people are here. Raise your hand if you're here to find your future spouse. Actually, it's funny because in Israel, I remember a couple of years ago, we organized an event called Date Picker. So we could pick dates. Date Picker. Ah, yeah, got it. All right, 9 people got the honest answer this time. I think we have a few slices of pizza still. People are eating. So thanks so much for participating in our very serious survey. We're going to be back in 12 minutes. So you're going to start at 8 sharp. And stay tuned because we have a very interesting speaker after the break. And go mingle, like don't sit here and wait.
All right, guys. Well, I'm excited to be here tonight. I hope you guys are at least half excited as I am to be here. Just quick thanks to Manona and the other organizers. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So tonight we're going to talk about web components, and in particular using web components in React. So who here has ever used, written, or heard of web components? Okay, so maybe about half. That's good. The rest of you will learn something that's pretty new tonight, and the rest of you, you'll learn something new. So that's always good. So my name is Hayden Braxton. I'm actually from Richmond, Virginia. I'm just here hanging out because I thought, what the heck, let's go to New York for a weekend. So I'm here. Yeah. I work for a company called Unboxed Technology. Who's ever heard of Unboxed? If you raise your hand, you're lying. I feel if you have, which I doubt any of you have, but if you have, let's talk about it later on. But I'm not here exactly representing them, but it's a cool place. You can also follow me on Twitter because that's what all the cool kids do. You can find me there. Blah, blah, blah. I do mostly front-end work, a little bit of .NET stuff in the back end. And I'd say other irrelevant things about me, but you probably wouldn't care to hear about all that stuff, so I'll spare you that agony. If you want to see the slides, you can find them on GitHub, as well as all the example code. It's a bit of a messy repository because there's like 2 examples and slides and all the stuff, but it's all there if you want to look at it now or look at it later. I tend to like to leave homework, if you will, for the interested reader for whenever I give a talk. So you'll find plenty of that in there. Also, any of my React, I don't primarily use React. I use React on the side. So you'll notice that a lot of my React code is probably pretty messy. Donavon, I did take notes. Don't worry about it. And I thought it'd also be a good opportunity for all you guys to practice cleaning up React code if you looked at my code. So yeah, we planned that. Yeah. All right. So what are web components? So when I say the word component, we all know what a component is. We all write components. But a web component is something different. A web component is a collection of browser APIs that allow us to write reusable snippets of HTML with defined JavaScript behavior and encapsulated styles that can be reused without the use of any front-end framework. So why should I care about web components? Well, besides that they're cool and they might get you a date, there's also important reasons why you should care. One, cross-framework compatibility. So you can write components that can be used just using the browser, and they can play pretty nicely with almost any other front-end framework. So, for example, you might work for a large company. So some friends of mine back home, they work for larger companies, and on different projects internally, they're using React, Angular, sometimes Vue, right? So in that case, if you write a component once, and then just sprinkle a little bit of framework on top to make it play nice with your framework, it's a lot less you have to rewrite if you want to be able to share stuff and have common components and common UI elements in between projects that run on different frameworks. It's also a smaller framework dependency, so I don't care what framework you're using, there's going to be some shifting underneath whatever you're writing. And whenever you want to upgrade to the next version, there's going to be some conflict, there's going to be some work to have to upgrade. Coming from an Angular background, we know that all too well, and I'm still a little bit bitter about that, but that's okay. But even still, if you have a component that's only dependent on the browser, then that's pretty much going to be good until you feel like rewriting it for the heck of it. But the browser APIs are really that support this are really starting to stabilize, and you're not going to get bit in the butt. You can write a web component now and still use it 5 years later if you want to. You might update it some, but it's not going to be out of date like our old framework code is. Also, you can also ship less code, which is always good for the user. And really kind of the, motivation behind web components was having div soup, or what I like to call the bootstrap problem. So besides what you might think, the idea of web components actually started quite a while ago. So I think the earliest article I could find on web components was from 2013, which is the same date or the same year in which React was open sourced. So the idea of, hey, having this reusable component almost like predates some of our front-end frameworks. So if you think back to Bootstrap, when that was the big thing, you as the user of that library, you're responsible to make sure you have the right CSS files, you put the right classes in the right things, you have the right JavaScript files, and you use the right elements, right? So they gave you the building blocks, but you had to put everything together every single time you wanted to use something. And then if you look at your markup, it's all a bunch of divs with a bunch of different classes, which isn't, I mean, that's okay. I mean, we still do that. But it's not the most readable and easy to understand if you just see a bunch of divs everywhere. So web components also make your code, your HTML in particular, much more semantic. Also, this isn't a huge issue in React because it's pretty simple, but if you want to display dynamic content, in particular, like if you have a part in your app where, okay, you know you want to show some component, but you don't know what that component should be until runtime, web components really help out with that as well. And React pulling that off is pretty trivial. Angular, not so trivial. So web components are great for us. But it's still helpful for React developers as well. And then lastly, web components are coming. So there's a meme that goes with this line, but I'm not going to make you look at that meme. I think you can guess what that meme is, and yeah, you know the one. But so nowadays, even third-party libraries are starting to adopt web components. So even if you never write a web component yourself, it's still beneficial to have the knowledge that they exist and know what they do and how they operate, because at some point you're going to have to interface with maybe someone else's web component that they wrote. And like, for example, we use Ionic, the Ionic framework at work. You guys probably don't know what that is because you all use React. But we use Ionic at work, and they just started using web components. So this most recent project I was doing at work is, okay, I hit some snags, and it took knowledge of web components to be able to get through that. Now, the million-dollar question is, are they production ready? Mostly, but let me ask you a question. Did anyone use YouTube today? If you don't raise your hand, you're lying. Can I say YouTube here? Is that okay? You know, it's like the other Vimeo. It's not as cool. It's like Vimeo, but it's red, and you know, maybe you don't know about it. But Google has an internal project called Polymer, which kind of helps, I guess, ease the pain for developers in using kind of like the next generation of browser APIs. And Polymer's major thing is, okay, making it easy and lightweight to include web components in your app. And Google did a good job of dogfooding that, which I don't know how much they dogfood Angular. Okay, enough hate on Angular. Okay, enough hate. But so they did a great job of dogfooding Polymer and web components. If you inspect a YouTube page, it's all web components, all written in Polymer. So if it's good enough for them, like, it's probably at least okay for the rest of us. So what are those web standards that are included underneath the umbrella of web components? So the first and most important is custom elements. So that custom elements is the API that really lets you say, okay, I want to have this HTML tag, and here's what it does. That's simple. Essentially, it's like writing a React component, but instead of using React APIs, you're using browser APIs. So you don't have web components at all without custom elements. The second and next most important thing is the Shadow DOM. Has anyone heard of Shadow DOM? Okay, a couple of you. So Shadow DOM is kind of like, no, it's not. I'm not going to go there. But Shadow DOM pretty much allows you to create a barrier around your element, especially the styles, so that way the styles in your custom element won't leak out to anything else, and there will be no external styles allowed to come in to mess up your styles. So you can always be confident that, okay, what I wrote here, if I use the Shadow DOM magic properly, then it's all, like, my styles aren't going to change. They're always going to be consistent. There's not going to be some weird case where they don't work right because someone else's style sheet broke it. No, it's always going to be cool. The next one is HTML templates. We'll look at that real briefly. It's important, but it's not real big or real complex. And the last, which is not important, is HTML imports, which is kind of a dead standard. Only Chrome, I think, implemented that, and no one else is going to, so don't worry about that. And it's kind of gross anyways. I don't like it. And you don't even need it, so I'm not going to talk about it. So browser support, surprise, surprise, Chrome supports everything, IE supports nothing, and the rest are kind of in the middle. This actually might be surprising for you to see Safari at this state, but it works. So the project I mentioned that we're using web components on at work is actually for shipping it, especially in particular for use on iPad Pros, and it works. Web components work just fine there. Firefox is almost there. You can use Shadow DOM and custom elements behind some experimental flags. And the current version of Firefox is 62. Comes 63. Custom elements and Shadow DOM are supposed to be like, okay to go, everything's good. So we're all pretty much there except for Edge, and they're in planning. They're like, it's going to happen at some point in Edge. Just they'll be the last ones. They'll be the rotten egg. So now let's look at some demos. Real quick, I want to rush over. Let me check my time. What time is it? Okay, cool. I'll brush over real quickly some like basic web component demos, and then we'll take a look at, okay, well, how does this all play together in React? Because there's a few gotchas if you want to use these things in React. So some demos. So since you can run web components anywhere, this is my kitchen sink web component demo. I always struggle to have like meaningful examples that also communicate the point I'm trying to make. So here's a very non-meaningful example that communicates all the points. This is my kitchen sink web component. So let's take a look at this nasty kitchen sink. Oh, not that one, this one. Cool. So real basically, if you want to write a web component, you're going to have a class that extends HTML element. And can you guys see this in the back? Is this good enough? Cool. Increase it? One more. I can get one more or else I can't see anything. Is that good? Okay. And then you can do some stuff here, and then at some point you're going to want to assign some a template to your component. So in this case, I'm using Shadow DOM and template and all that stuff. We'll talk about that in a minute. I want to talk about the simple example first. So very basically, since this now refers to, an HTML element, I can just say, okay, well, let me append a child to this, and then I'm going to stick, we'll talk about that in a second. The most naive way of putting markup in your web component is just saying this dot enter HTML and then whatever the heck you want inside of there. That's not super efficient because if you have multiple instances of this web component, then the DOM's got to parse that same exact string every single time. So this will be the only mention of the template tag. So pretty much up here what we're doing is we're saying, okay, let me create this template element, and then I'll say enter HTML for the template element is whatever I want to. And then that way, it only has to be parsed once by the DOM. So pretty much, it's super simple to use. Everyone supports it, so just use that. And what we're doing with this template here is I'm saying, okay, I'm going to append a child instead of assigning enter HTML. I'm going to clone the content, and true just means, okay, clone it deep if you're not familiar with that. Now, I want to go back to this, and we'll come back to that in a second. All right. So there's a couple lifecycle events that you get with web components. There's a connected callback when it is attached to the DOM, and a disconnected when it's detached from the DOM. Pretty simple stuff. Let's see. You can also watch for attribute changes. So, and it's interesting. So frameworks kind of abstract the property versus attribute problem. If you're not familiar with that, there's like an HTML element has both properties and attributes. Some of them map to one another. Some don't exactly map to one another. And frameworks do a good job of keeping us from having to make the decision of, okay, well, am I going to assign the attribute, property, both, when, what has precedence? So that is the thing you have to take into consideration when writing web components. But we can do that with, we write the static getter that returns an array of attribute names. And anything in this array, when an attribute with that name is changed, this callback is fired, and then you can do whatever you want with it. So that's a cool thing. And then let's see. Whether or not you want to reflect your properties back to your attributes is, I think, just a design decision that you have to take. Depends on the context, depends on the use case for your thing. Best thing to do when you're writing a web component is think, okay, well, which native HTML element does this most closely resemble? And then kind of take a look at how that guy, like, for example, a simple input. Take a look at what an input does with maybe the value attribute versus the value property, and kind of model your web components based on that precedent. So it's pretty simple. Last thing you do with this class is you say custom elements that define whatever tag you want to use, and then that class. And that's pretty much it. So if I look over at the slides, I just said, hey, kitchen sink. And it gave me this nasty kitchen sink of HTML gobbledygook that I put on the screen. So let's unpack a few things here real quick related to Shadow DOM. So right now, all these styles are, they're nice and encapsulated. They're all there by themselves. I'm going to turn off the Shadow DOM and see what happens. Let's see. So right here, I'm saying, OK, and this is just global CSS in my app. So if I have any paragraph element, let's make it green, yellow text, and we'll override and do dirty things with our CSS. So if you see, let's see, which one of those is a paragraph? Kitchen sink. Nope. Yeah, OK. So this guy, Bob, this guy's a paragraph. So, but it's not green, even though I said important. So let's go back and turn off our shadow root and see what happens. And it looks really different. None of my styles are there, and I got beaten out by some jerk who decided it was a good idea to put important after their CSS property. So we've all done it. It's OK. But it's time to move on from that. All right. So a couple of things about Shadow DOM. So you also can work with a thing called a slot, which is kind of like your child prop in Render or in React or transclusion if you use Angular. But pretty much that says, OK, well, the stuff that I put in between the open and close tags of my kitchen sink, I want to show up actually inside. And so let's see, we said message and default slot, chili cheese dogs, and that's why you see the stuff here, is because I put it in the slot. And a fun thing about the slot is you can have different kinds of slots. So you can have a default slot. So anything I just stick in there is going to end up in there unless I put a name, or sorry, a slot. So it's kind of confusing. I have a name slot here. So I call it secondary slot. So I came over here in my markup, and OK, this small guy here, I gave it a slot attribute with the name of the slot I want it to go inside of. And just host right here can be overridden. So host applies to our styles that are applied to the host or the parent of the Shadow DOM. So kitchen sink, so the outer part of the kitchen sink is, let's see, right here. This guy is not inside the shadow tree. Everything else here is. So that means anyone outside of here, just the normal style sheets, have free reign over styling kitchen sink. So this is a way, using this host selector, you can define default styles. But then they have like 0 specificity, so anyone can come along and override them, which is kind of what you would expect. Also, you notice I'm using this. Does anybody know what this guy is right here? This dash dash color? What is that called? CSS variable, yeah. So I actually didn't know about this until recently. But now, since we have Shadow DOM, it presents a problem. What if you want to style like a little something inside the web component? Well, then you can expose these CSS variables, and then I can just come down here and say, well, so pretty much I'm allowing an outside user of paragraph to determine the color of Bob here. Let's test that out real quick, just for fun. Kitchen sink. So you can pretty much, if you define a value for a CSS variable on any descendant of the Shadow DOM, it will apply, but it's pretty much, it's common use case to define, so I'll say color here, and we'll do that on the element selector of the web component itself, because it just makes more sense. It's easier to keep track of that. And we'll just make it red. And Bob is cool is now red. So that's kind of neat. All right. So I think that's all. Yeah, there's more we could say, but I know you guys want to talk about React, so we're going to talk about React some. The last gotcha with Shadow DOM is like, well, anything that I put inside of a slot technically, I'm sorry, I lied. So this stuff is actually not a part of the shadow DOM either. Only this stuff is in the shadow DOM. So when you're kind of working with styles, when you're trying to do do a query selector for an element inside, you can query select something that's in the shadow tree or something that's in a slot, and you kind of got to keep track of, okay, what's in the shadow tree, what's not. And they have this weird name called light DOM, which is like just normal, not in the shadow DOM. I think it's kind of weird, but that's what they call it. So now you know. If you ever see light DOM, you know what that is. All right. So enough of web components. If you have questions about that, you can come talk to me later. We'll talk about web components. They're fun. This is something else I built. We'll see this in a minute. Now, how web components relate to React. So I mentioned earlier we use this framework called Ionic. Ionic started as kind of a UI library, and it was heavily dependent on Angular. About 6 months back, they did another rewrite, because they'd already done one rewrite of their library, and this time they're only dependent on web components. So, and they use this other internal tool they built called Stencil, which, so if you notice, and we'll look at more, but my web component code is very, very imperative, and that's at odds with the declarative nature of React. And React code is much nicer to read than what you see here. So Stencil is actually it looks like React and Angular had a baby, kind of, but it's heavily influenced by React, so it got the React genes. And it pretty much gives you a declarative way of writing a web component, and then all that is just transpiled to just vanilla JavaScript code. So it's only the development time tool. Pretty cool. You should check that out. It looks a lot like React with some TypeScript decorators. Also, on the same note, so this guy, he's the guy who started Ionic. This was Monday? Was that Monday? So they just now started, because there's a little bit of React they have to write to make this work, and then a little bit of Angular they have to write to make these things work with Angular. So they just started that work this week of doing that for React. So if you are a React user and you're curious about web components and Ionic, here pretty soon you'll be able to play with Ionic web components. And actually, I'll show you this real quick. I have a small example that I got started just for you guys. React Ionic demo that's using the Ionic web components and React code. So it's not actually, there's no official React support at this point, but if you want to kind of get your hands dirty and see what's in there, you'll have to wrap their web components, but you can kind of play with it if you want to see how it works. So that's cool. Last thing before we look at a React example is there's this cool site called Custom Elements Everywhere, which pretty much tracks the compatibility of the custom element API with front-end frameworks. Oh, geez. Well, you can look at that later. Yeah, we'll do that. But if you look at that, no hate, but React scored lowest as far as compatibility with web components. And the couple major pain points were passing properties. If you have rich data like arrays or objects as your properties that you want to pass on to your children, it's going to pass those as strings, which you don't want. You don't want to do that. And then events, don't forget about it. It does events from custom elements don't work at all with React. So you have to write a wrapper that will kind of merge your event handling props with the native events coming from your custom elements. So now we'll look at the React demo, which I know is what everyone's been waiting for. Let's see. Oh yeah, I built this app. It's a pretty dumb app, but you can kind of click through and see different things. This is all web component stuff, and I have this cool side menu that changes pages. So, and this is also a web component. So I want to take a look at real quickly the web component behind these guys, and then the React wrapper that I had to stick around these. So yeah, all this stuff is nested, which is kind of painful, but that makes it easier just to have it in one repo. Oh, not that one. This one, React Web Components demo. You can also, this is the one that you can clean up later. All right, so we'll look at cool tabs. So let's see. let me actually go back to my web component code real quick. I'll get cool tab button, and then cool tab button. Cool. So the couple things going on here. I am expecting that, actually I can show you what this looks like because it's in the slides. So cool tab. All right, so just using the web components, this is what it looks like. It expects like this parent cool tab element that kind of collects all the cool tab buttons. And then it's kind of like almost like a form input. Whichever one you click, that's the value property on this cool tab parent. And then you could use that in a form, survey, whatever you want to do. So that's kind of what that does. And so we'll look at what I have to do in React to make that happen. So let's see, actually, so the cool tab parent, its template is just a slot. So it's like, hey, put some stuff in here. And that's all it does. And then there's like some logic to look out for events. So it's like listening for a tab select from the child elements. So I can't, and this is a custom event, so I can't listen for that in React. So what the cool tab had to do was, its render function was really simple. It's just, hey, render this cool tab custom element, and then any props that you get, which are going to be the buttons themselves, render those children inside the slot of the cool tab element. I know that was a lot, but look at the code later. It doesn't make sense. So the first thing you'll notice is I had to use a ref. Have you ever used a ref in React? Only a few of you. So you shouldn't use it, but there's like certain special cases where you should, and this is one of those special cases. Because what I needed to do was I want to be able to see that the tab that the selected value changed. Okay? So in component did mount, I went ahead and I added an event listener onto the ref for that custom element. And that, so I can respond to that event. And then when the tab changes, so then I'm going to expect that, if from the React side, you would expect that, okay, if there's a tab change event, you would expect to be able to pass in an on-tab change prop that handles that event. So we had to do that wiring up behind the scenes here in React manually. And then that way, if we go and look at how this is used, let's see here. Yeah, so that allows me to pass in this on-tab change handler, right? And so this is the React component that I wrote that wraps that web component. And then I did a similar thing for these guys. Pretty much when they get clicked, they add an attribute to change the style, and then they fire another event upwards to notify that, hey, I got clicked, I'm selected now. Yeah. Any questions about that? All right, we'll have questions at the end. Last thing I want to show you is this open menu, which isn't too complex either, but it's at least interesting. It covers a case that the cool tabs don't. So if you look at this cool side menu, everything's cool, then we see that I've got a couple slots here. I've got a slot where I can stick a title, and I've got a slot where I can stick menu items. All right, so let's search for cool side menu. Yeah, all right, so right here, this is how I use that the cool side menu. It's kind of a different case, having to handle those different slots, those different places where your user could stick content. So again, this probably doesn't make much sense just seeing the code on the screen, but you can look at it later if you want to. A couple of ways you can handle that is, one, you can just expect your users to know about web components and have them say, okay, let me put slot is equal to title on the thing that should be the title, and then everything else by default is just going to end up as the body of the component. So in this case, I could do that, or I created this real don't want to do that. Created this real simple, cool side menu title component. And if you look at this, all it does, it just says, you know what, we're going to render a div that already specifies the slot for you in case you don't know. So from the React developer standpoint, it might be a little bit nicer. I don't know. I always struggle with like what level of abstraction to go at. And then it just renders its content as well. So yeah. So these are just simple examples. And if you look at this code later on, it's, you know, a little bit messy, but yeah, I definitely think it's something you can learn from. And at some point in the future, I think you'll find yourself, believe it or not, having to deal with web components in some form or fashion. And they're pretty fun. So with that, here's a few resources you can check out later on when you pull down these slides, because I know you will. And so a couple different links, some use cases, and just some cool things to check out related to web components in general and web components in React. So that's it. Thanks so much for suffering through this awfully boring talk. If you want to say hey, you can reach me on Twitter or GitHub. Thanks so much.
Two questions if you have. Ask 2 questions.
Yes, sir.
How do you deal with styles going back to IE11?
Just repeat it.
How do you deal with styles going back to IE11? In particular, like the shadow DOM encapsulation. That's a great question. So I should have mentioned this. So there are polyfills out there that work pretty well. So for example, some of the tools out there, actually a lot of the tools out there work. They build in the polyfills for you, so you don't even have to worry about it, and they'll kind of like lazy load them for only the browsers that are needed. So there is a polyfill for shadow DOM, Polymer, so YouTube is using it. However, GitHub is using custom elements, but I read just today that they opted not to use shadow DOM until it's supported on all the browsers that they need to support. Because there's, I think, some performance hit for the shadow DOM polyfill, but good question.
That was actually kind of it. It was
Yeah.
just like, okay, what do you do with stakeholder approval on, you know, browsers that just, you know.
Yeah. So, so what do you do with stakeholder? You know, how do you deal with old browsers? You know, either polyfills or just keep on doing what you're doing and one day use web components. So, yeah.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Right. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks the 9 people who watched us on the live stream. Hope you enjoyed the meetup. We have to leave the building by, let's say, 8:50. So please do all the conversation downstairs. It's still a nice weather there. Thanks for coming. Thanks Vima for hosting. Thanks all the speakers. See you next time.